The humid, recycled air of the USS Liberty's mess deck hung thick with the scent of stale coffee, fried chicken, and the faint, ever-present tang of jet fuel. It was a smell as familiar to Petty Officer First Class Maya Raven Cruz as her own reflection. For 36 hours, she had been running on adrenaline, black coffee, and the focused silence that lived in the space between heartbeats during a mission. The debrief was over, the gear was stowed, and now all her body screamed for was the simple, mundane act of eating a hot meal in a quiet corner. Her mind, however, was still miles away, replaying the night vision green outlines of a target building on a hostile coastline. Her boots, scuffed and dull from use, moved with a quiet, practiced economy of motion across the non-slip decking. Her eyes, a cool and assessing glacier blue, scanned the crowded room. They were the eyes of a hunter, even here, in the supposed safety of her own ship. They missed nothing. The tired slump of an aircraft handler's shoulders, the nervous laughter of a new ensign, the easy camaraderie of a group of Seabees. And then they found her spot. The small two-person table tucked near a viewport, offering a sliver of a view of the moonlit, churning sea. It was her sanctuary, but tonight it was occupied. 4 young soldiers, their Army combat uniforms still looking stiff and new, had claimed the territory. Their chairs were pushed back, their voices a loud, boisterous wave of sound that crashed against the more subdued hum of the Navy crew around them. They were loud with the unearned confidence of men who had trained for war but had not yet met its true, ugly face. Maya recognized the type instantly. She had been proving herself to men like this her entire career. She moved forward, her tray holding a simple meal of stew and a banana. The lead soldier, a corporal with a name tape that read Evans, noticed her approach. His eyes, bright with a careless arrogance, did a quick, dismissive sweep of her person. She wore a standard-issue green flight suit, faded in patches from countless washes and bleached by the sun. It was devoid of any unit patches or rank. The only identifier was the name tape above her left breast, Cruz. Evans offered a smirk that was all teeth and no warmth. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, his tone making it clear he was not sorry in the slightest. He gestured with his thumb, a lazy, disrespectful flick of the wrist. "This here's our spot. Officer Country is that way, couple decks up." The 3 other soldiers at the table grew quiet, their smirks mirroring their friends. They saw a woman alone. They saw a flight suit with no rank. They made the easiest and most dangerous assumption. They thought she was someone who could be moved. Someone who did not belong in their space. Maya stopped. She did not sigh. She did not frown. She simply stood there, her tray held steady in her hands. The neutral mask of her face did not change, but a profound shift occurred in her posture. It was subtle, a coiling of an inner strength, a settling of weight. The casual ease was gone, replaced by a stillness that was more threatening than any loud confrontation. Her gaze, which had been distant and weary, now focused on Corporal Evans with an intensity that could drill through steel. The air around their table seemed to grow cold and still, the noisy mess deck fading into a distant buzz. The challenge had been thrown, and Maya Raven Cruz never ever backed down from a challenge. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible thing. It was a heavy blanket that smothered the soldier's bravado. Maya's eyes, locked on Corporal Evans, held no anger. Instead, they held a deep, almost weary patience, the look of a master cartographer forced to explain a simple map to a lost child. In that suspended moment, a memory, sharp and clear, pierced through her fatigue. It was not a memory of battle, but of a quiet study years ago. The smell of old books and polish replacing the smell of jet fuel. She saw her father, not in his full dress uniform with its glittering stars, but in his worn-out armchair. His hair was more silver than brown then, and his eyes, the same shade of blue as her own, were filled with a complex mixture of pride and concern. "The path you have chosen, Maya," he had said, his voice a low rumble. "They will never make it easy. They will see the daughter of a general. They will see a woman. They will see everything except the warrior. You will have to be twice as good, twice as tough, and twice as silent for them to see you even half as well." She had nodded, young and fiercely determined. She had not just wanted to be a sailor. She had wanted to enter the most hallowed, impenetrable brotherhood the Navy had to offer. She had forsaken his famous name and all its influence. The name Cruz was her mother's maiden name, a clean slate. Every step, every bruise, every drop of blood shed would be hers alone. Back in the present, the memory solidified her resolve. These boys, for they were boys in that moment, were just another obstacle, another test. They were not the first, and they would not be the last. Corporal Evans shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. The smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He had expected her to flinch, to mutter an apology and scurry away. Her absolute stillness was unnerving. It was the stillness of a mountain. It was the stillness of a predator. One of the other soldiers, a private first class with a nervous tick in his jaw, broke the silence. "Look, lady, he said the table's taken." "No room." His voice was higher than he intended. Maya's eyes did not waver from Evans. She slowly, deliberately, placed her tray down on the edge of the table. The sound of the hard plastic connecting with the metal surface was a sharp, definitive crack in the tense quiet, like a single gunshot. The soldiers flinched. A tiny, almost imperceptible reaction, but she saw it. Her hands, now free, rested on the table. They were not the soft, manicured hands of an administrator. They were tools. The knuckles were a landscape of old scars and calluses, some from hand-to-hand combat training on the gritty mats of the kill house, others from the brutal, raw friction of fast roping down rough hemp lines. There was a faint white line across the back of her right hand, a souvenir from shattered glass during a kinetic entry years ago. The soldiers' eyes, almost against their will, were drawn to her hands. They saw the story written there in scar tissue, a language they were only beginning to learn. Then, her gaze still pinning Evans, she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was low, flat, and carried the absolute authority of someone used to being obeyed in the midst of chaos. "I'm not an officer," she stated, the words clean and precise. "And I'm not ma'am." She let that hang in the air for a beat, letting them digest their mistake. The assumption that she was some high-ranking, non-combatant female officer had been their first and most critical error. They were now adrift, their simple plan of intimidation completely unraveled. They were looking at a woman they could not easily categorize, and the unknown was a frightening thing for a soldier. The easy confidence they had displayed moments before was gone, replaced by a wary, uncertain silence. They were waiting for her next move, their own initiative completely stripped away. The balance of power on that small patch of the mess deck had irrevocably shifted. The silence in their little corner of the mess deck was now absolute, a pressurized bubble in the sea of surrounding noise. Maya watched the understanding dawn in Corporal Evans' eyes, slow and painful as a sunrise over a war-torn ridge. His gaze, once so arrogantly dismissive, finally broke from hers. It traveled down, following the line of her arm, past the scarred knuckles resting on the table, to her right wrist. There, partly obscured by the cuff of her flight suit, was a tattoo. It was not a gaudy, colorful piece. It was muted, almost subtle, the ink a dark greenish-black against her skin. But its form was unmistakable to anyone who knew what it represented. The eagle, clutching a naval anchor, a flintlock pistol, and a trident. The seal trident. It was not a symbol one bought or got for enlisting. It was a symbol that was earned, paid for in blood, sweat, and a piece of one's soul at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. The cocky grin on Evans's face didn't just fade. It disintegrated, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The other three soldiers, seeing the change in their leader, followed his gaze. Their eyes widened. One of them, the young private, actually leaned back in his chair as if physically pushed. "You're—" Evans finally managed, his voice a dry croak. He couldn't even form the word. It was too immense, too impossible. A female Navy SEAL, the stories, the rumors, the debates they'd had in their barracks. They were all crashing into the reality of the woman standing before them. Maya gave a single, sharp nod, her expression still unreadable. "Naval Special Warfare," she confirmed, her voice still that same low, steady pitch. There was no boast in it. It was a simple statement of fact, as matter of fact as stating her name. But those three words landed on the four soldiers with the weight of 1,000 anvils. The world seemed to tilt on its axis for them. The noisy clatter of trays, the hum of ventilation, the distant squawk of the 1MC, it all melted into a dull roar. They were no longer looking at an anonymous woman in a flight suit. They were looking at an operator, a shooter, a living, breathing member of the most elite warrior fraternity on the planet. Every story they had ever heard about Bud's Hell Week, about impossible missions in the mountains of Afghanistan, about covert raids under the cover of darkness, suddenly had a face. And it was this face, a woman's face, etched with a calm that spoke of unimaginable storms weathered. Their eyes, wide with a new, awestruck respect, now scanned her anew. They saw the lean, ropey muscle in her forearms. They saw the absolute stillness in her posture. A stillness that spoke of a mind capable of making split-second life-or-death decisions. They saw the faint network of fine lines around her eyes, squint lines from years of staring down a scope, of scanning horizons, of facing into the biting wind and salt spray during long, cold transits on a combat rubber raiding craft. This was not a person who pushed paperwork. This was a person who pushed the limits of human endurance and skill. The casual disrespect they had shown moments before now felt like a profound, almost sacrilegious mistake. They had foolishly challenged a mountain, and the mountain had not even needed to tremble in response. The sheer, humbling force of her silent credibility was more powerful than any shout, any threat, any display of rank could ever be. The air was thick enough to taste, a heavy cocktail of shame and awe. Corporal Evans felt his face grow hot, a burning flush that crept from his collar to his hairline. He wanted to look away, to find some escape from the calm, unblinking gaze of the woman, the SEAL, but he was trapped. His mind was a frantic scramble, trying to reconcile the image of the elite warrior with the reality before him. The other soldiers had become statues, their earlier bravado frozen and shattered. The private who had spoken now studied the scuffs on his own boots as if they held the secrets of the universe. Maya watched the transformation. She saw the dawning horror in their eyes as they realized the magnitude of their error. It was a look she had seen before, though never in a setting so mundane. It was the look of men understanding that they had been measuring the ocean with a thimble. She felt no triumph, only a familiar, weary sense of repetition. This was the burden of the trident. It made you a walking legend, a symbol, when all you often wanted was to be a sailor eating a hot meal. Her eyes flickered down to her own tray for a moment, to the stew that was now surely cold. A flicker of regret passed through her, not for the confrontation, but for the lost peace. This moment, this lesson, was now part of her duty, as much as any mission. She looked back at Evans, whose mouth was still slightly agape. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and picked up her tray. The movement was fluid and economical, devoid of any aggressive intent, yet it made all four soldiers flinch as one. She was reclaiming her space, her autonomy, with a simple, physical act. "The table's yours. Gentlemen," she said, her voice still low, but it now carried a new tone, not of threat, but of instruction. It was the voice of a senior operator debriefing a new team. She held Evans's gaze, ensuring the lesson would be seared into his memory. "Remember this moment. The enemy doesn't care about your assumptions." She paused, letting the words sink into the silence. "And neither do I." She did not wait for a response. There was nothing they could say. She turned, her movements still that same effortless, predatory grace. Her boots made no sound on the deck as she walked away, a solitary figure moving through the crowded mess. She did not look back. She did not need to. The weight of her presence lingered at the table long after she had gone, a ghost of humility and respect. The four soldiers remained frozen. The silence she left behind was louder than any of their laughter had been. Corporal Evans finally let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It shuddered out of him, a shaky, broken thing. He looked at his friends and saw his own stunned disbelief reflected in their faces. They had come onto this Navy ship feeling like tough, battle-ready soldiers, and in the space of 2 minutes, a single woman with a quiet voice and a tattoo on her wrist had dismantled their entire worldview. The lesson was not about who was tougher. It was about the profound difference between training for war and having lived it. It was about the quiet authority that came from proven courage, an authority that no rank, no bluster, no swagger could ever hope to imitate. They had learned more about real strength in that brief encounter than in all their months of training, and they would never, ever forget it. Maya moved through the crowded mess deck, a solitary island of calm in a sea of noise. The encounter faded behind her with every step, its significance already diminishing in her mind. It was a minor event, a small skirmish in the long, quiet war she fought every day just to exist in her own skin, in her own world. She found an empty spot along a bulkhead, leaning against the cool metal as she finally took a bite of her now lukewarm stew. It was fuel, nothing more. Her eyes, however, were drawn to the dark porthole beside her. In the reflection, she could see the distorted image of the 4 soldiers still sitting at her old table. They weren't talking. They weren't eating. They were just sitting, a little hunched over, as if carrying a new, heavy weight. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. She remembered being that young, that certain of the world's order. She remembered the first time she had met a legend in the flesh, a grizzled old master chief with a chest full of medals and eyes that had seen decades of conflict. She had been struck dumb with the same reverent fear. A different memory surfaced, unbidden. It was not from buds nor from a mission. It was from a dusty village in the Helmand province years ago. Her team was providing overwatch for a joint army patrol, much like the one those boys probably belonged to. She was perched in a crumbling building, her rifle a familiar weight in her hands, her spotter beside her. Through her scope, she watched a young, eager army sergeant, not much older than Evans, interacting with a group of local children. He was confident, loud, trying to win hearts and minds. He didn't see the sullen teenage boy watching from a shadowed doorway, didn't see the unnatural bulge beneath his shabby clothes. Maya had. Her voice had been calm, a soft murmur over the radio, a warning that was heeded just in time. The sergeant's life was saved not by his own training, but by her quiet, unseen observation. The enemy, indeed, did not care about your assumptions. Back in the mess deck, she saw Corporal Evans slowly shake his head, a gesture of pure self-reproach. He finally picked up his fork and pushed the food around on his tray. The lesson was taking root. It was a good thing. They would be better soldiers for it, safer, more aware. That was the real value of the moment, not her own vindication. From across the room, a grizzled Navy chief with a salt and pepper beard and a face like a worn leather map caught her eye. He had been watching the entire exchange from his seat near the coffee urns. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a smile. It was something deeper, more meaningful, a gesture of recognition that passed between members of the same tribe. It was an acknowledgement that she had handled it right. She had schooled them without humiliating them. She had taught a lesson that might one day save their lives, and she had done it with the quiet, unshakable professionalism that was the true mark of their community. Maya gave a barely perceptible nod in return, then turned her gaze back to the blackness of the porthole, to the endless churning sea beyond. Her peace, though delayed, had finally arrived. The ship steamed on, and so did she. The silence at the table was a physical presence, a fifth uninvited guest that had settled in after the SEAL's departure. Corporal Evans stared at the empty space where she had stood, his mind reeling. The word SEAL echoed in his head, each repetition stripping away another layer of his former arrogance. He had been so sure of the world's order. Officers, enlisted, grunts, support. He had neatly slotted the woman into a box labeled non-combatant, and in doing so, had made a catastrophic error in judgment. It was a humbling so profound it felt like a physical blow. Private First Class Miller, the youngest of them, was the first to speak. His voice was a hushed whisper, barely audible over the ambient noise of the mess deck that now seemed to cautiously flow back into the void they occupied. "Did you see her hands?" he murmured, his eyes wide. "The scars, all over her knuckles." He looked down at his own soft, unmarked hands, suddenly feeling like a child playing dress-up in his father's uniform. Another soldier, Jenkins, a usually quiet man, nodded slowly. "And her eyes," he added. "She never got mad. Not once. It was like we were just background noise." He shivered, despite the warmth of the room. That calm, assessing gaze had been more intimidating than any drill sergeant's scream. It was the look of someone who had measured them, found them lacking, and hadn't even deemed it necessary to inform them of the result. Evans finally dragged his gaze from the empty space and looked at his men. He saw his own shock and shame reflected in their faces. The memory of his own smug "sorry, ma'am" made him cringe inwardly. He had been patronizing a warrior who had likely conducted night raids he could only see in his nightmares. He thought of the stories he'd heard, whispered legends of operators who could infiltrate a heavily guarded compound, complete an objective, and exfiltrate without a soul, knowing they were ever there. And one of those legends had just been standing in front of him, asking for a table, and he had told her to get lost. "We're idiots," Evans said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It wasn't an accusation aimed at his team. It was a confession he included himself in. "Complete and total idiots." Miller nodded, his earlier bravado completely gone. "What do we do now?" "We learn," Evans replied, his voice firmer now, finding a new footing in the lesson they had just been given. "We remember this. We don't judge, we watch. We listen." He looked around the mess deck with new eyes. The tired-looking sailor swabbing the deck, the petite woman operating the food line, the older chief sipping his coffee in the corner, he now saw a ship full of potential, of hidden depths and unspoken stories. The world was no longer a simple place of clear labels and easy assumptions. It was a more complex and, suddenly, a much more dangerous place. The enemy didn't wear a uniform, she had said. And now they understood that sometimes your allies didn't either. They finished their meal in a contemplative quiet, the food tasting different now, the lesson they had ingested far more nourishing than the stew on their trays. The USS Liberty felt like a different ship, a place where respect wasn't given with rank, but earned with silent, unshakable competence. And they had just been given a master class. The low thrum of the ship's engines was a constant vibration through the deck plates, a sensation as familiar to Maya as her own heartbeat. She stood on the open deck, the night air cool and sharp against her face, a welcome relief from the stuffy humidity of the mess deck. Below, the black water churned into a ghostly, phosphorescent wake, a river of stars flowing into the endless dark. Here, in the vast emptiness of the ocean, the small tensions of shipboard life finally fell away. The encounter with the soldiers was already filed away, a minor data point in a long career of navigating the expectations and prejudices of others. It had been necessary, but it held no glory for her. It was simply another moment of maintaining the equilibrium she needed to function. A presence settled beside her at the railing. She didn't need to look to know it was Senior Chief Miller, the man with the leathery face who had nodded to her earlier. He was a relic, a man who had seen more deployments than most sailors had birthdays. He leaned his forearms on the cold steel, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a long moment, they stood in a comfortable silence, two predators sharing a watering hole, their mutual understanding deeper than words. "Heard you gave some of our soldier guests a geography lesson," Miller finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that blended with the sound of the ship cutting through the water. Maya offered a faint, almost invisible smile, her eyes still on the dark sea. "Just clarified the borders a little, Senior Chief. They were a bit lost." Miller grunted, a sound of approval. "Good. A little lost now is better than a lot dead later." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who rarely wasted them. "It's a heavy thing you carry, Cruz, that trident." "Heavier for you. They see the eagle, the pistol, the anchor. But some of them—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely back towards the interior of the ship. "They still just see the woman holding it." "I know," Maya replied, her voice quiet but steady. "My father told me it would be this way." "The general is a smart man," Miller acknowledged. "But he can't know this. No one can who hasn't worn it." He turned his head slightly to look at her, his eyes sharp and knowing in the dim light. "You handled it well. No theatrics, no grandstanding. You just showed them the map, let them find their own way to the truth. That's the mark of the real thing. The loud ones are still trying to prove they belong. The quiet ones, they already know." The words landed on her with a weight that was both a burden and a comfort. It was recognition from a source that mattered, from a man who had no reason to offer empty praise. He was part of the bedrock of the community, a keeper of its unwritten codes. His approval meant more than any formal commendation. "They're good kids," Maya said after a moment, deflecting the personal praise. "They'll learn. They just needed a nudge." "We all needed a nudge once," Miller said, pushing himself away from the railing. He gave her a final appraising look. "Get some rest, Raven. The world never stays quiet for long." He turned and melted back into the darkness of the deck, his footsteps silent. Maya was alone again with the sea and the stars. The senior chief's words had settled something inside her. The faint, lingering tension from the mess deck finally dissipated, replaced by a renewed sense of place, of purpose. She was not just a woman in a man's world. She was a sailor. She was a SEAL. She was Maya Raven Cruz. And on the vast, dark ocean, under the endless sky, that was all that ever needed to be said. She took one last deep breath of the clean, salty air, then turned and headed for her rack, the ship steaming steadily onward into the night. The following morning brought a different kind of light to the mess deck, the sharp, clear sun of the open ocean replacing the dim, artificial glow of the night before. The atmosphere felt cleansed, the air itself seeming to carry a new respect. Maya entered, her body already humming with the anticipation of the day's training schedule. She moved with the same quiet purpose, her eyes scanning for a place to grab a quick breakfast before the day began in earnest. She saw them before they saw her. The 4 soldiers were at the same table, but the scene was utterly transformed. Their chairs were tucked in, their postures straight, their conversation a low, earnest murmur. They were no longer a loud, sprawling entity claiming space. They were a cohesive unit, occupying it with a newfound awareness. As she passed their table on her way to the coffee urn, a hush fell over them. Corporal Evans looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no trace of the cocky smirk, no dismissive arrogance. Instead, his expression was one of sober respect. He gave her a single, sharp nod, a gesture not of friendship but of profound professional acknowledgement. It was the kind of nod one soldier gives to another who has earned their unqualified regard. The other 3 soldiers followed his lead, their own nods a silent chorus of gratitude and understanding. Maya paused for a fraction of a second, her own gaze meeting Evans. She did not smile, but her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. She returned the nod, a brief, graceful dip of her chin. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The entire interaction lasted less than 3 seconds, but it was more powerful than any spoken apology or lengthy conversation could ever be. A bridge of mutual respect had been built in the silence. She collected her coffee and moved to a different table. The weight of their stares now a comfortable, familiar thing. The weight of earned respect, not of challenging curiosity. She could feel the change in the very air around them. They had been tested, not by her, but by their own preconceptions, and they had passed. They had chosen to learn rather than to resent. They had chosen humility over pride. Later that day, during a joint fast-roping drill on the flight deck, the wind whipping and the roar of helicopters drowning all sound, Maya saw the lesson in action. Her team was demonstrating advanced techniques for the visiting Army unit. As she hooked in, her movements a flawless ballet of muscle and will, she spotted Corporal Evans and his men watching from the designated safety area. They weren't joking or looking bored. They were focused, their eyes tracking every move, every secured carabiner, every controlled descent. They were watching a master craftsperson at work. As her boots hit the deck with a solid thud, she unclipped and turned. Evans was still watching, but now his gaze was analytical, studying the technique, the form, the economy of motion. He saw the warrior, pure and simple. The gender, the assumptions, the entire messy context of the night before had been burned away in the crucible of shared professional purpose. The enemy, as she had said, did not care about their assumptions. And out here on the windy, dangerous flight deck, neither did they. The lesson was complete. It had started with a challenge over a table and ended with a silent nod of respect under the open sky. The USS Liberty sailed on, a microcosm of a changing world, carrying its crew, its soldiers, and its quiet, formidable seal, all moving forward together.